I would like to welcome everyone. I'm Rachel Rodine, ESCA's Director of Education and Events, and we are so excited to welcome you to the first ever Leadership Lab, which is presented by ESCA's Rising Leaders Committee. Today, we have the honor of learning from Will Estes with Emerald Carpets and Elizabeth Fretheim with Freeman about sustainability in the events industry. So, without further ado, Will and Elizabeth, and closing the loop, the path to sustainable events.
Thanks to Rachel and the ESCA team. I'd like to thank the ESCA Rising Leaders Committee for allowing us to be the first ones to kick off this webinar series. A lot of work went on behind the scenes. This started out as an idea about 6 months ago. We got the ball rolling, and it's extremely exciting to see this come to fruition today. I want to thank everyone tuning in today. That means, you just don't care about the future of our industry. You care about the future of our planet, and that's big. We need everybody we can to be engaged and aware and want to take action. Our guest today is Elizabeth Fretheim. As Rachel introduced her, I'd just like to add a little bit more on that. She brings 15 years of sustainability experience to this space. She spent time at the global conglomerate Walmart working on their global supply chain sustainability initiatives. She worked at Nikola Motor Corp on their sustainability initiatives. And now she is at Freeman Company. So she brings a wealth of knowledge to us. She's a true advocate for our industry, and she's somebody that I would call an absolute trailblazer for what we're doing and what we're looking to do in the industry. So without further ado, I'd like to dive in. Elizabeth, just to kind of start things off, I always find this interesting, and I may know the answer to this question, but for our audience out there, I'd kind of like to ask you this kind of simple question to start off. How did you get into this industry? A lot of people just kind of fall into it, and other people are intentional about it. But from what I've heard, the majority of people just kind of fall into this industry. So if you could just kind of tell us how your path led you here.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And as Will said, so I'm grateful to be invited to be here, excited to talk to rising leaders. As Will mentioned, we need everybody on the green train. So no matter what your role. So very, very excited to be here. I think ironically, I fell into the events industry sort of as a surprise, but I also fell into sustainability somewhat unintentionally as well. So I have a business degree, not to dive into how old I am, but when I, first started my career, if you wanted to be in the environmental industry, you were kind of more on the NGO side, right? Like you were sort of working for a consultant or an NGO, and a lot of it was focused more on compliance issues. But to be honest, all of that, while I always cared about the environment and different things, it really wasn't in my mind. I had a business degree. My first job was in business development, and I was working for a company that did a lot of work in very remote locations. And when I say very remote, I mean places where there are nobody, right? We were operating and monitoring radar sites across the very top of Canada and Alaska. We worked at diamond mines. We worked at all kinds of resource industry. We supported the military, all of these things. And I was assigned a project to design and build a workforce camp that was really like a hotel up in the oil sands of Canada. Now, if some of you are familiar with that from an environmental perspective, it's long been considered one of the dirtiest projects on the planet because the oil is mixed in with sand. And so it's very energy intensive, very destructive to get out. If it's close to the top, it's literally like surface mining, right? You're just bringing these big trucks, these big shovels, you're shoveling everything up and then refining the oil. And so on my first trip up there, I came over the crest of a hill and was just shocked at what I saw, just the amount of devastation. Now, I'd love to pick at the oil companies. But I flew a plane to get there. I was driving a car. I was probably wearing some kind of polyester, plastic, oil-based clothing, all of those things. I just thought, man, there's got to be a better way of doing this. And so I really credit, we were partnered with a First Nation, which is, the same as the Native American Indians down here. And they were super about, like, sustainability wasn't something like kind of a side job, right? That was just how they ran their business. And, just working with them, I learned a lot about how sustainability, is important, obviously, to the planet, it's important to the communities, but is also beneficial to business. And so when I was finished that project, I went to the owner of our company and I said, I really want to do sustainability. And she said, I really don't like that people are going to have a sustainability person. And I thought, well, I'm out of here. But then she said, you know what? It's because that's how we should do business, right? It just makes sense to the business. So I shifted over. I worked for our alternative power generation business. Then, as Will mentioned, I was at Walmart for 10 years driving sustainability in the supply chain. Worked for a zero emission vehicle manufacturer. And then ironically, one of my bosses from Walmart, who had recently joined Freeman and had sustainability under his purview, asked me to review a job description. And first, when he said Freeman, I was like, who's Freeman? And now I like to joke that we're probably one of the bigger companies that you don't know that you actually do know. But as I read about the industry and read the job and everything, I said, hey, so what if I would be interested in this? And he's like, we'd love it. So long story short, that's how I got here. Like I said, I had no idea even who Freeman was, anything about the industry, but there are a lot of connecting files to obviously sustainability more broadly. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like quite the journey. And it sounds like you had a very strong aha moment where you realized that, sustainability was extremely important. So, that kind of leads me into my next question for you. For our listeners out there, could you just kind of briefly define what sustainability means and kind of what that means in the context of the events and trade show industry?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, one of the most common definitions of sustainability is being able to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So it's, how are we being responsible with our resources? And I like to I'm a big hiker. So it's the sort of like, don't leave any footprints behind, leave things better, than how you found them. I think in the context of the event industry, that whole leave things better than you found them is so key, right? When I first came into this industry, it was described to me as building the city and tearing it down in 3 days, right? And then building another city. And so being able to kind of leave no footprints behind is so important, I think, in our industry. And we'll talk more about what that means, because it's more than just taking everything out of the building, right? It starts so long before you even get into the building.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, to me, sustainability is about the same way. It's about how can we keep our resources in circulation through reuse, repurpose, recycle rather than landfill. It's pairing smarter designs with smarter policies, but we also want them to be environmentally friendly, but also operationally efficient. So to me, I believe sustainability goes hand in hand with operational efficiency. If you have sound energy policies and you're running your machinery in an efficient pattern, or you're optimizing your forklift traffic, I mean, those are sustainability wins, but that also comes in cost savings because you're being mindful of how you're operating your equipment and all and your policies. So, and to piggyback off what you said about leaving things better than the way you found it, that's kind of a great segue into my next question for you. a lot of convention centers are switching to a zero waste left behind model. And my question for you is that a realistic goal right now, or is that more aspirational at this time?
I would say it is definitely an aspirational goal. I think if you tried to do it today, you're probably just shifting the problem, which goes back to what I was just talking about, right? Where, okay, yes, you can remove it from the venue, but what happens to it then, right? Are you just taking it back to your own offices to landfill at that point?
Right.
A lot of the materials that we use in events are very complex, and that's going to sound really weird when you probably think about there's some chairs and some booths and things like that. But when you're trying to recycle, one of the biggest things is having, kind of a mono material. And what I mean by that is only having one material. So like this morning, I was having a conversation about our fabric. Our fabric has polyester, has polyacrylate, it has a fire retardant, it has dyes, it has all of these things. And so that's very complex to be able to pull apart and refine back into something else. And I know Emerald Carpet, one of our best partners, and love that Will is on board and his team really driving that. Same thing with carpet. And that's what they've really done, is to get down to that mono material so that it is more easily recycled. Same thing with furniture, same thing with some of the PVCs and other materials that are on site. So one thing to note about zero waste in the industry is that generally it doesn't mean zero. Generally what it means is 90%, that you are diverting 90% of your waste from landfill. We all know that there are some waste items that are just going to be super hard to recycle. And that could be because they're so complex, there's so many chemicals, there's things like that. But then there's also just waste streams that you really don't want to dig into. And I know when I was at Walmart, the one example that we always used was restroom trash, right? There aren't many people or even machines or different things that can go through restroom trash and separate it out. So there are always going to be things that are probably still landfilled. Maybe they can be incinerated or burned, but that's not necessarily the most sustainable solution either. So I think, to your point, Will, it is aspirational, but I would say I am so hopeful with the technologies that we're seeing, like, all the work that Emerald is doing to be able to recycle their carpet, potentially add PCR, post-consumer materials into it, get the dye out so that it can really be recycled into itself. If you're looking at some of these systems, the optical capabilities of the sorters, but it really is looking at what you're bringing in. Do you have these mono materials that you're bringing in? Do you have a plan for everything that you're bringing in? We have a pack in, pack out policy, or, at least we encourage people. And I find, for good reasons, we're super excited about what we're bringing in. What does it look like? What is the messaging? Who's going to be there? What are we giving away? All of those things. And then, you would be surprised how many people have not thought about how and what are they taking out, right? And so people will come to us sort of last minute at the end of a show saying, hey, I don't know what I'm going to do with X, Y, or Z. Help me do that. Literally came up yesterday, where we had a person saying, a company saying, hey, we've got all this material, we don't want to throw it away, how can you help us?
Right.
And the show was closing, and so then you're scrambling and your options significantly decrease, when you're kind of reactive versus proactive.
Right. So kind of what I'm hearing is kind of begin with the end in mind, right? So have a plan for disposal at the end of the show, and have those smarter designs in place. So it seems like there's a lot of opportunity there for improvement. And so it kind of leads me into my question is, we've got room for improvement, but Can you kind of walk me through where you see sustainability winning in the industry right now and where we might be falling short?
Yeah, and ironically, this may seem counter to what some people would think, but North America is actually doing fairly well in this area as compared to other areas, including Europe, but definitely Asia and some of the other areas. And the reason for that is that there is a lot of rental equipment available to exhibitors and to organizers. A lot of companies are reusing, so we are seeing a lot of the things coming in going back out. So I think we're actually doing pretty well on sustainability. In fact, there's a new standard coming out for stands to measure, sorry, stands. I just brought in the European version, but for booths or exhibits, the program is called Better Stands. And it's going to certify and have standards for, how sustainable your booth is. And really almost automatically, most exhibits in the US are considered bronze, because they are made from reusable or rental materials that are coming in and going out. So we're doing quite well. That said, there still is a lot of things that are left behind, especially when we're talking about like samples that companies may have for their booths, right? It's less expensive for them to leave it than it is to take them
Right.
out. It can be, sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. But with the samples and materials that people have, furniture, sorry, we do have, there are lots of options of rental furniture. There's obviously lots of options for rental carpet, things like that, but people are buying them at the last minute and really don't have a plan for how we get them out. Now, on one hand, we are trying to look at programs for that. So if somebody buys furniture, it's only used for 3 days in an exhibit, where can we donate that and not put it into landfill? But there are a lot of logistics around that we need to work out. But I think you're starting to see with the focus and energy around sustainability that people are being much more innovative in the solutions that they're bringing to these shows.
Right. I would just kind of like to add in there, there's room for improvement, as you said, but some of these people, the low hanging fruit out there is where you can get your quickest wins. And I believe if you go after this low hanging fruit, if sustainability can be daunting and a little overwhelming at first. So if you can just go after these little wins and start building yourself a foundation, I think once you get that foundation built, you can start looking at your product innovation. You can start looking at better design. You can start looking at your energy policies. So I want you to know it doesn't have to be some over the top change right off the bat. What we're asking is just put your front foot forward and just take the step, start the journey, and hopefully you get to the point where we're doing product innovation and better designs. But I just want to let you know that, low hanging fruit, the quick wins, build that foundation. And a gentleman once told me the good thing about low hanging fruit is it always grows back. So you're always going to be able to find these places to go find these little wins to continue to build on that foundation to make it stronger. But the end goal is obviously to get through this product innovation and smarter design. Real quick, Rachel has told me we've got a question over here in the chat. What's something today what's something today that keeps you up at night in regard to sustainability that has not been fixed or is having trouble being fixed?
Interesting question. Probably an area that most of you hopefully won't have to dive into, but it's really data reporting and disclosure that keeps me up at night these days. But to be honest, it's more, this is going to sound like a maybe optimistic answer to this, but what keeps me up is more thinking about all the opportunities that we have, right? Just all the things that we could be doing, but we need to figure out. So some of the processes, like I said, one of our biggest challenges in being more sustainable on site is that our time to move out of the venues is shrinking and shrinking. And so the time and ability of the people on site to separate all the materials, right? Put fabric over here, put vinyl over here, put PVC panels over here, put shrink wrap over here, put donations over here, you know, this type of, put furniture over here, but then office supplies over here and all of those things, right? Is just not possible. And quite honestly, you don't have the space, you have heavy machinery running this way and that way. So it's pretty complex. So that's one of the biggest things that keeps me up at night, is just thinking about how we solve that problem. And there are some things coming to the forefront, reverse logistics centers, if some of you aren't familiar, but our hope is that we can get to a point where anything that has value and has a program on the other side, so anything that can be recycled, anything that can be donated, anything that can be reused, kind of all goes on one, two, three, depending on how big the show is, trucks, goes to another center where it gets segregated, right? And then probably gets saved to volumes that make sense for transportation to these different locations, right? Like we have and I'll do a plug. I wish I had something here I could show you, but there's a company called Fretheim that I love. They take vinyl from billboards and they make them into purses and handbags and backpacks and things like that, right? So they will take our vinyl, but we have to have it in enough volume that makes sense for them to pick up. And that's at least 4 Gaylords worth, which is generally more than a lot of, I love, somebody knows about Fretheim. Way to go, Alicia. Yeah, so, you know, they need 4 Gaylords, which is more than a lot of shows have, you know, in one show. So then we have to find, you know, where do we store and save up those 4 Gaylords before we can ship them off. So I think that's the biggest thing that keeps me up at night, is more just thinking through some of these problems versus the worry side is the data, the reporting, the regulations. But it's the opportunities and the optimism that keeps me up more.
Yeah. You know, so while we're talking about opportunities and whatnot, so looking over the past 5 years, what's the biggest shift you've seen in sustainability right now? And I'm going to add a second question on there that I found in the chat. Do these shifts, or do you think the innovation and shifts are coming voluntarily through customer demand, from top down, or regulations?
The biggest shift, I mean, I think to the second part of it, I think they're coming from all angles. Literally yesterday, we awarded our BEV award, which we give out to employees that show, you know, that innovation and passion and drive to change things. And, you know, we opened up, this is somewhat sad to say, because I wish we had done it before, but we opened up the nominations broadly, kind of to the whole company, because we were finding that either people didn't know what they were doing was actually sustainable, you know, or was promoting sustainability, going back to what you said earlier, Will, or they thought it was not worthy of kind of showcasing and being an award. And it was amazing how many nominations we got from people that we didn't even know were out there, you know, out there doing that. So, yeah, I would say, I mean, regulations are definitely driving a lot. Our customer base is driving a lot, but I would say there's just so much passion in the organizations and at the individual levels that I think the real innovation comes from that, right? That are people are doing it just because they're passionate and interested versus complying to regulation, where, because then the good thing about regulation is it puts everybody on an equal footing, right? And so companies aren't as hesitant to invest. I think the problem sometimes with some regulations is that some regulations will tell you what the solution is, right? Which sort of hinders
Right.
some of that innovation.
Right. Absolutely.
The biggest shift, sorry, that I would say is in the capabilities of recycling. So going back to companies that are able to pull all of those complex pieces apart in an efficient, sustainable, economical way is really driving, especially in the event industry, driving
Yeah.
solutions that we haven't seen before.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I appreciate that answer for our audience. I got another one here. It goes back. I want to backtrack just a little bit. We were talking about the low-hanging fruit. So what are some low-hanging fruit sustainability initiatives that we as general service contractors can suggest to our clients to do that are easy for them to incorporate without much cost?
Absolutely. And I sent kind of a list out that hopefully I think will be shared
We can share that.
post this post the panel. But one of the biggest things is really looking at what you're bringing in, right? And how much of it. So for example, instead of some of the giveaways that could be thrown out literally as people are walking out of the exhibit, how do you really enhance your experience with your attendees and the people that are coming to your exhibit or your booth or your show? How do you really think through your purchases? Is it adding to your message? Is it adding to the booth? And if not, maybe you don't need it. I'm going to look at Will when I say carpet, and I know, I'm not trying to be a salesperson for Emerald, but carpet is a big part of the footprint, so we're very focused on it. We have some customers that are very progressive on sustainability, but then they want to do custom colored carpet, that cannot be reused because it is a custom color, right? So there may be some times where that carpet really is part of the look and feel and messaging. But when it's not, choose a standard color that can be reused. Think about, ask your suppliers, do you have paper-based products versus plastic-based? So for example, if you look at some of the booths that are out there, some of them have these PVC panels in the structure. We have a paper base for that. Instead of using foam core for signage, use honeycomb. And in some of these cases, it's actually less expensive. It is less expensive to use honeycomb than it is to use some of the foam-based products. So really dig in with your suppliers, ask them, what they have access to, what some of your options are. And I think you'll be surprised at how many options there are to be more sustainable without adding cost.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I'm sure our audience appreciated that answer. I'm going to switch gears. I've got one of myself for you. But it's geared towards our audience out here. I would just like to say, we're talking about low hanging fruit. It doesn't have to be low hanging fruit, but what's just one thing that our audience can go out and do to drive change in their organization after this webinar? And what's maybe one thing they could look to adjust?
I would say, there are so many things, but a couple of them are maybe more mindset driven. So one, going back to what Will said before, that, often when we think about sustainability, we do think about some of those more high-tech things that I was talking about, the recycling, technologies that use optical sensors and cameras and, chemicals and all of those things. I would bet if you started looking at what you're already doing to drive efficiency, to drive out waste, that there are probably a lot of things you're doing that are sustainable already. So don't think of sustainability as always being costly, complex, technology driven, et cetera. There are a lot of processes out there that can drive sustainability. Anytime you think about waste, right? Whether it's waste in a system, waste in a product, right? Those are all things that drive sustainability. And then really think about that life cycle assessment, right? And you can think about a life cycle assessment of a product, but you can also think about a life cycle of a process or system. So again, just thinking about your events from start to finish, right? What are we bringing in? Why are we bringing in these materials? And what happens at the end of life? And engage your suppliers, interact with your peers. I'm guessing whomever asked the question about, as a GSC, right? It's some of us, even as one of the largest companies, and I can tell you this from experience with Walmart, obviously as I think Will described it as one of the big conglomerates, right? We're one of the biggest companies in the world, but still there are things that Walmart cannot drive on its own, right? We need the industry to move forward. So think about some of these things as pre-competitive, where we work together to drive some of these solutions versus, everything is a competitive process. So think about that collaboration and deep partnership with your suppliers, especially.
Yeah. I think that's a great point to point out there as well. This sustainability is not necessarily about competition right now. It's about collaboration across the industry. It's about collaboration through our associations. What can we all do to come together to make these events more sustainable? What can we do to inform our attendees to be more sustainable while they're there? I just think there's a lot of stuff we can get out there to them. Going back to, I think some things that you could adjust. One thing I'd like to see is maybe not have as many single-use plastic water bottles out on the showroom floor and have people hand out reusable water bottles. I think that's something that seems pretty simple and something that you could initiate fairly quickly. But that was just an idea off the top of my head on that. But let's see if we got any questions in the chat. I thought I saw one pop one up. I did not. Okay. On my next question, Elizabeth, when we think about the next generation of event professionals, what skills do you think they need to lead sustainability forward in this industry?
I think that the ability to think through a life cycle is super important. I think understanding some of the basics of what drives sustainability, and energy, water, waste are kind of always brought up. You can get into other categories like, biodiversity, for example, but start small, start with, some of the easier things to tackle. And then as you start thinking about, okay, every time I use energy, and when I say energy, I'm talking about electricity, I'm talking about fuel in your vehicles, I'm talking about propane or diesel or gas in some cases in your material handling equipment, right? Every time I'm using something like that, is there a way to be more sustainable? Is there a way to be more efficient? Are you changing out your fluorescence for LEDs with motion sensors? Are you turning off equipment at night? Things like that. I think when you start understanding some of those things that really impact sustainability, I think that's just understanding those basics, right? I don't think you need to care that much at this point about what's scope 1, what's scope 2, what's scope 3. And then within your organizations, I think sustainability can often be overwhelming because there are so many things you could do, right?
Right.
And so I often talk about the 4 I's of how you get down to what's important. One is understanding what your impacts are. So where are you impacting the environment in your operation? 2 is understanding where do you have influence, because a lot of those impacts you may not have influence over, right? Like the supplier is so far down the supply chain that you'll never reach them, or we have a lot of conversations about attendee things that attendees do when they come. How much influence do you have over how the individual attendee gets to your show, right? Probably not a lot. So what can you influence? What of those, what are you inspired to influence? What are some of the things that are meaningful to you, to your company, to your stakeholders? And then lastly, where is there innovation, right? So where are there actually solutions to some of those? So going through that process with your company, I think is important so that you can really prioritize what you go after.
Right. Okay. Let's see. We have a question here in the chat. How does Freeman or any organization balance the costs associated with sustainability and create incentives with stakeholders to participate?
So stakeholders, I'm thinking our customers probably, and hopefully I'm going to answer that question. Customers and attendees at some of these shows. Again, I think there are a lot of things that don't cost necessarily, right? And some of them do, certainly, and we're trying to use our scale to drive down those costs. But meeting with our customers and helping them understand the benefits of some of these changes. And in some cases, quite honestly, we'll just move to a default, right? After we've done testing and we know and understand that the change, so the different product, the different material, has the same performance characteristics of another item, that there isn't an increase, we will change. And instead somebody has to ask for the non-sustainable way to go. So I think there are so many customers out there now. It's an interesting time right now in sustainability and with regulations and things, but being able to work with our customers and just really explain the benefits of the sustainable change that we're making, and maybe it's a process, maybe it's a product. I think that has tended to work really well with our stakeholders, right? Most of them, they want to do the right thing. They just need to be given the solution that they can grab onto.
Right. Well, we appreciate that answer. I'm sure our audience loved that. I would like to say, we're running kind of tight on time here. We've got a little less than 10 minutes left. I'd just like to take another chance to say thank you to everybody that took 45 minutes out of their lunch hour or morning, wherever you're tuning in from, to listen to this today. We are super grateful for everybody that tuned in, super grateful for ESCA and ESCA's Rising Leaders Committee for allowing us to do this and be a part of this. It's great to see this come to fruition. Like I said at the beginning, a lot of work went on behind the scenes to get this going. And I would like to point out that be on the lookout for other things coming in the pipeline through social media, ESCA newsletters, wherever it may be. There's other things in the pipeline. So I encourage you to keep your eyes peeled for what's coming next. And with that, Elizabeth, I got one final question for you. What gives you hope for the future of sustainability in our industry?
Oh, the biggest thing are committees like this and the panels and knowing that there's interest and there's,
right.
So many people that want to see this happen. It really is, again, not trying to age me. I'm sorry, I can't see everybody, so I don't know how many of you are rowing in my boat, but we have a very robust research arm that goes out and does, a lot of research on events and things like that. And when they come back and tell me that, sustainability is really table stakes, that's what really gives me hope it's just an expectation, right? It's not something special on the side. It's table stakes. It's what is expected. And that's what really gives me hope.
Awesome. I'd just like to piggyback off the beginning of what you said. what gives me hope is seeing all these people tuned in today. You know, that doesn't mean they're just aware. They're engaged. They want to make change. They want to see greener events. They want to see a more sustainable future. I don't know how many of y'all have kids, but I've got a young daughter at home. I want to leave the earth better for her than what I found it. And so today, with everybody tuning in, I believe we had 55, 60 people tune in. I could not thank you enough for being here today. You being here alone is my hope for the future of sustainability in the trade show industry.
1000%.
Yes, ma'am. Well, if that's all we have, or if there's any more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. If not, then I guess we'll call this a wrap, and y'all be on the lookout for what we have coming in the future.
And if any of you have any thoughts, questions, concerns, post this. Will knows how to get a hold of me. And
Absolutely. You can go to my LinkedIn page. You can send me a message. I'd be happy to connect. If there was a question you had and you didn't feel comfortable asking it, you can shoot me a private message and I will be happy to answer it. And if I can't, I think I know a lady that might be able to help me answer it for me.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely.
So much fun. Like I said, this is where the hope is.
Yes, ma'am. We're so thankful for you. I cannot thank you enough. And I want to say thank you to Freeman for allowing you the time to come on here and speak to us. And like I said, you're a true advocate and trailblazer for this industry, and we thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Will, so much for taking the time to talk to us today about sustainability in the events industry. ESCA will be sending out a post-event recap via email to everyone who attended. We will have this session recorded and up on our website, as well as sharing that handout that Elizabeth created with some key points from today's discussion. So thank you all so much. And like Will said, we have a lot more down the pipeline for the Leadership Lab presented by the Rising Leaders Committee. So stay tuned. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank y'all.
Thank you.